As the highly contagious Omicron variant continues to spread here in Florida, there's a lot of misinformation out there. So to help separate fact from fiction, Dr. Mohammad Reza, an infectious disease expert and specialist, joins us now via Zoom. Good morning. Thanks for being with us.
Good morning, Jeff. Thank you for having me.
So as we mentioned and as we've learned over these last few weeks, this variant is highly infectious. And it's raising some questions about the efficacy of cloth masks in particular. Are they enough to protect against the spread of Omicron?
That's a great question, Jen. So the reality is masks rather than no mask is better by far. A mask that has multiple layers, covers your nose and mouth, will protect you. If it's a thinly layered cloth mask, it doesn't provide as much protection. And this is more so for spreading things that we may have. In those cases, wearing a surgical mask along with a cloth mask on top will be more protective.
Yeah, so I've seen those. You're talking about a cloth mask. It's just one layer as opposed to the others that we've seen on the market that have multiple layers. Good point. So some people have reported on social media that when they take an at-home test, they do not get as accurate of a result when they followed the directions and swabbed their nose, but say they have had a better result when they swab their throat instead. Is one way better than the other for those who take these tests at home?
So it's interesting because we're seeing different outcome in terms of the different variants in terms of testing. There are some small studies now with 67 and 30 people that have come out that have not been peer reviewed at this point, but it is showing that with the Omicron variant, some data shows it may show up sooner in the oral cavity rather than nasopharynx or the nasal cavity. And this is a small number, but at the same time, that antigen test is coming back positive a bit sooner when people are swabbing their mouth after coughing a couple of times. But then if you're having symptoms and either one of those tests comes back negative, that antigen rapid test, it is still recommended to get that PCR test, which is the gold standard.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. As much as it's frustrating for some people to have to wait 2 or 3 days for the result, it is the best way to know for sure. So now we have heard about breakthrough cases, people who are vaccinated and still catching the virus. But I know that you shared with me last week some data from the United Kingdom that illustrates the difference between those who are immunized and those who are not.
Yeah, this was a large group of people that the United Kingdom Health Security COVID study, which was released, and it looked at almost 500,000 people that were infected with Delta, 500,000 infected with Omicron. And what they saw was with that one vaccine, you received about 52% effectiveness in preventing hospitalization with Omicron. If you have both doses, about 72%. And as time went on, if it was 6 months, that protection decreased to about 52%. But what we saw was striking was once you were boosted, that protection went back up to that 88%. So that's why it's just so important to get that vaccine as well as that booster, because we're seeing that's what provides protection. And overall, it showed that the unvaccinated had an 8-time more likelihood of ending up in the hospital with COVID than those who were vaccinated. So those are all important points that we can take away from this study.
And I think so. I mean, that was very telling for me. In fact, I made sure to get my kids boosted, in fact, this weekend. So I want to also, that's specifically hospitalizations, but there's also some really interesting data which even supports more the need for the booster shot that speaks specifically to those who develop symptoms even though they have been vaccinated.
Yeah, we're seeing this more and more, this breakthrough infection if you've been fully vaccinated. The data still shows that once you're fully vaccinated, the risk of you requiring hospitalization or having severe COVID infection is markedly decreased. Now, majority of people that are ending up in the hospital are unvaccinated. So doing all those things, getting vaccinated, but I always stress using that layered protection, wearing a well-fitted mask, avoiding large indoor crowds, hand hygiene. These are all things that are important, not just against COVID, but against flu and other respiratory infections.
Dr. Reza, thank you for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.